in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got some accidents inbound to Columbia, which has us a little wider crowd. So I think we're just, these two gentlemen have very important schedules and keeping on time. So there'll be some folks tripping in and want to allow plenty of time for questions from the crowd as we get into all this. So with that as some background, thank you all for coming to the May Issues Forum. This is our third in-person forum for 2022, which I think people are very happy to be back in person and covering the items that are impacting or could have an impact on our community. And this month, we're very happy to welcome Alan Wilson and Byron Gipson to cover an important subject, which is basically the increase in violent crimes that we're seeing in our area and nationwide, and the trends and safeguards that they are seeing put in place to take care of everything. Attorney General Wilson is the state's 51st Attorney General and has been in office since 2010. His focus is to keep South Carolina families safe, defend their freedom, and protect their futures. He served as South Carolina's Chief Prosecutor, Chief Legal Counsel, and Chief Securities Officer. Mr. Gibson was elected to his position in 2019 and is responsible for serving as Minister for Justice and fair and diligent prosecution of defendants charged with criminal offenses occurring in Fifth Circuits in Richland and Kershaw counties. So thank you, gentlemen, both for being here with us today. I'd like to start by asking you all in 2 or 3 minutes, if you could summarize the makeup of your staff and kind of your day-to-day responsibilities of managing that staff and your roles.
And good morning, all. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. I come from a Baptist tradition where sometimes it's better to be seen than viewed. And so if I don't hear a voice back, sometimes I'm wondering if I'm. But good morning. I'm Byron Gibson, your Fifth Circuit Solicitor. Just by way of what we do, we are the chief prosecutors for Richland and Churchill County. South Carolina is made up out of 16 circuits. And Columbia is in Richland County and in Kershaw County comprise the Fifth Circuit. We have a staff of in Columbia about 35 lawyers and staff people about 94 or so staff people, and in Kershaw County 3 lawyers and about 7 staff people. So between the 2 counties, we prosecute mainly felony matters. Felonies are crimes that generally carry a year or more in jail or $500,000 more. There are also some misdemeanors that we handle, such as criminal domestic violence cases and sometimes DUI cases. We have attorneys who handle those matters as well. Our job is to diligently prosecute those matters, as well as it used to be to manage dockets, although the Supreme Court now has taken a more affirmative approach in managing dockets, and we prosecute those to the best of our ability. We have several types of programs that are at our disposal that include veterans court, mental health courts, homeless courts, and we have pretrial and intervention diversion programs, things like that. But we also have teams that comprise violent crime, general prosecution, special victims, which is essentially criminal sexual conduct cases, rape cases, things of that nature, elder abuse cases. And we also have a drug team and a nonviolent team. So any of those, any types of crimes that fall in those parameters, we handle all of those matters. We have the benefit of having the Attorney General's office. They have jurisdiction statewide. And so there are matters that sometimes will conflict out to the Attorney General's office because they may be better suited to handle it, maybe the resources are better, or sometimes there are conflicts that would not allow our office to specifically handle. And we also have partnerships through with other solicitors' offices and the U.S. Attorney's Office to handle matters that obviously are federal and things that we don't have jurisdiction over. We'll assist with our resources any way that we can.
Oh, good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. First off, I want to say how great it is to be on the stage with my good friend Byron Gibson. We have a great professional and personal relationship, and it's always nice to be out in the communities with the various solicitors and law enforcement leaders talking about these types of issues. And thank y'all for having us. The solicitors, always great to be with you. Last time I was with them, we were walking a mile in women's shoes to raise awareness and fight against sexual assault against women and others. But with that being said, also, I see there's also the Baptist tradition. Everyone's sitting toward the back. There's no one front row here. So no break people. We are all sitting in the back. But Again, my name is Alan Wilson. I am your Attorney General, and just to kind of correlate with what he said, I'm the state's, under the state constitution, I'm the chief legal officer and the chief prosecutor of the state. Like Byron, there are 16 elected circuit solicitors in other states that call them district attorneys, pretty much the same thing. While I'm the chief prosecutor, I don't hire or fire solicitors. They are elected by independently by all of you, but I do work with them, as he said, to handle all of their conflict cases. Also, we prosecute our own cases, violent crime cases. We prosecute internet crimes against children, human trafficking cases, Medicaid provider, recipient fraud cases, and other boutique type crimes. We also do interjurisdictional cases in which, you know, the Byron gets a drug trafficking case that bleeds over into another county. That might be more appropriate for a state grand jury case, because the state grand jury can prosecute, you know, cases outside of the county. It can go to Richland, to Kershaw, to, you know, any other county that's in the area. Whereas the solicitor has to stop at their jurisdictional order. So that is one of the benefits of the state grand jury and the Attorney General's office. We also handle all the criminal appeals. So when one of Solicitor Gibson's attorneys prosecutes a case and that person's sent off to the Department of Corrections, what is that person who's sitting in prison? What is the one thing that a person sitting in prison that Solicitor Gibson is just prosecuting? What do they want? To get out, right? You're absolutely right. To get out of prison. And there's several ways to do it. One involves file and a hacksaw, right? The other, there's two other ways. One is filing PCR, which stands for post-conviction relief, and the other one is filing an appeal. The difference between, here's the layperson's definition of a PCR and appeal. An appeal is when the defendant sitting in prison says, I'm sitting in prison because the judge is an idiot. And a PCR is when the person sitting in prison says, I'm sitting in jail because my attorney is an idiot or the prosecutor is corrupt. And everyone's an idiot or corrupt but the person in prison. So they file those. Our office has to defend them all the way until they run out their appeals process, which can be for years and years and years. Under my office, we have the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force and Human Trafficking Task Force. We have the sexual units, which is when people commit sexual violence offenses. Sometimes they can be held over after they complete their prison term for mental health counseling and treatment in the Department of Mental Health. And the Supreme Court has upheld that. But it's our job to ensure that due process rights are protected, but that if they are a true threat to the community, that we hold them over so that we don't re-release an offender into your community who was predisposed to commit sexual violence offenses again. We have a similar, and one thing that we have that solicitors don't have, they're strictly focusing on prosecuting crimes in your community. The Attorney General's office represents the state of South Carolina in all litigation, civil and otherwise. So we have consumer protection, antitrust, securities, and the civil division. So if someone sues the state or the state is suing someone, it happens by our office. So it's not just criminal, it is also civil. So we work hand in glove with local law enforcement, local prosecuting agencies, and legislative. That's it.
Great. Thank you. A lot of y'all know this, but this week was supposed to be our focus on small business issues forum, and that was the intent of this original meeting. But with the increase in recent violent crimes, we were very lucky to have these people join us to cover this and how it's impacting our community. So I have some very specific questions. I'm going to allow breaks for the audience to ask questions as well. But stepping back for kind of a 2 or 3 minute answer what y'all just did there, how are you seeing trends and the violent crimes, and how are your offices modifying your policy to change how you combat this versus 2 or 3 years ago, given the large increase?
And I'd say, when you say violent crimes, well, I think that we got to take a half step back and just realize this is not a problem that just started today. It didn't just start Easter weekend at Columbia. It didn't just start in 2019 when I took office. This has been an ongoing problem for a long period of time. And one of the things that we have to be honest about if we're going to sit in these chairs and in any chairs in this office, in this room, I always tell folks, and some people have heard me say before, anytime you point the finger this way, there are always 3 that are coming back at you. And so we have to realize this is a collaborative approach. You cannot arrest away or prosecute away at this thing. There is a collaborative approach. I sat in a room last night with Chief Holbrook, Sheriff Lott. We had providers, we had the FBI was there, ATF, alcohol, tobacco, firearms was there, U.S. attorneys were there. We all talked about strategies for the decreasing gun violence and how we can better handle prosecuting gun violence, and then the wraparound programs that need to exist. What I can tell you is this is a community problem, and that's why it's good to see everybody here and everybody invested in trying to find ways that we can do better with how we handle, these violent matters. With our office, we take these matters as seriously as we can possibly take them. I can tell you since January of this year, we've tried 6 murder cases, did 6 convictions, 3 life without parole, 1 last week actually over in Kershaw County, 2 got 50 years or more, 3 life without parole, and others 30 to 35 years. That's just jury trial. That's this year. That's the January. And we have over 60 others. What I'll tell you is we train, we work hard, and we are unyielding when it comes to gun violence. When people are dying and being hurt and innocent people being hurt, we're unyielding about that because we have to be. But I think what we have to look at is just how we invest in our resources and wraparound programs and in supporting community services and communities that are looking to find ways to occupy youth who are come out, especially for summertime. We got to find ways to invest in those things. And until we do it, we're going to be on the backside of this, because by the time you get to my office or Attorney General's office, something has already happened. Somebody's already been hurt. Somebody's already died. And so we're going to do our job to the best of our ability. We've got, like I said, we've got close to 40 lawyers, and we have a backlog now of almost 19,000 cases. And so I can tell you, funding is important. Talking to your local legislators about how you fund and give us the ability to have more lawyers to prosecute, that matters. But you also have to have funding talks and goals directly to community programs. It has to happen, because if not, we're just going to stay in this cycle of always doing what we've always done. And if you do that, you're not going to make money. You have to start early. You got to have more programming and partnerships and collaborations with business leaders as yourself, with communities, with schools. We got to do a little bit more in those areas. I can preach on this for about an hour, but I know we have another
That's
time.
great. Thank you. Great summary.
That's the plate, man. Just to kind of echo what he said and to expand upon it a little bit, I'm a firm believer that the criminal justice system is mostly reactive. It's really treating a symptom, not a problem. And obviously, by the time someone gets to the criminal justice system, there's already been a problem that put them on that path. Now, the criminal justice system is good at times we qualify at times that there are programs from the criminal justice system. There's drug courts, there's veteran courts, alcohol treatment courts, anger management, these situations. There are things that can help lower recidivism rates and get people who, there are good people who do bad things, they get punished, and then we got to get them back on the path into reintegrated and assimilated in society. We don't want to put a scarlet letter on their chest so they can't get a job, So at times the criminal justice system can remediate that problem. But generally speaking, it is addressing a symptom of a problem, not the problem itself. Benjamin Franklin was famous for a lot of things. One of my favorite quotes that he said is, "An ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure." And so, when you look at the criminal justice system and the people who are entering it, I always like to look at the universe of people across the racial spectrum, the demographic, the gender, everything, just looking at everybody. We can have conversations about causation versus correlation, but there's a relationship between people who are coming from single parent families, impoverished areas with poorly performing schools, areas with poor infrastructure, with lower job rates. Doesn't matter whether you're Hispanic, white, black, or whatever. If you come from one of those areas, there's been studies on this, there is a higher probability. And by the way, I'm not saying that single moms or single dads can't do just as great a job in a traditional nuclear family. That's anecdotal. Statistically speaking, there's a higher probability that those people that live in those type of areas that have those type of problems are more likely to look. What do kids want? Kids want structure. They want a family. They want protection. And sometimes they don't feel like they have that, or they don't have the rules of society to go by. They look for rules elsewhere, and they usually find those where? In the form of what? A gang, right? And so if it's not a gang activity, it's an other type of activity with other people. And so that feeds that universe of people who enter the criminal justice system years after they after they begin the crime. So we can have a very thoughtful debate, and I'm sure the questions will go that direction about criminal justice reform and mental health counseling and all the things that we're doing. And the legislature can react, and Byron and I can react to what's going on in our communities relates to crime. But until we as a community and as a society address what's feeding that, I feel it's kind of like until you plug the holes in the boat, it doesn't really do any good to get the water out of the boat. You got to plug the holes first. And sometimes I feel like that's what we're doing as in our policies. We're trying to ladle water out of the canoe, but we're not plugging the hole that's filling the canoe with water to begin with. And I think you gotta address, you gotta do it all, holistic. You can't just focus on one thing and negate or forget the other. But it's got to be across the board.
Going a little bit off script, it sounds like both of y'all are in agreement that you have your choice of, raising staff or your ability to try more cases versus putting more money towards preventive measures. You probably gear more towards preventive measures than adding more staff and getting more cases.
I think we both jump on that one.
You go first, and I'll tag and I'll go first.
I will never tell our legislators that we can't skillfully use monies that come our way because we can't. We do need more staff. We're losing staff left and right. I will always say that. But yes, bottom line is yes, we've got to though. You always do what you've always done. You'll always get what you've always got. And we've always come at this from a law enforcement perspective. Hey, we're just going to arrest, we're going to lock up, we're going to do this, which needs to happen in some cases. There's no question. That's part of my job, and I accept that. I lean into that 100%. But you've got to also find creative ways to invest in communities. And that's not always a popular thing to say, but it's the truth. I mean, you look and see where these issues are standing. I won't say the Chief Justice, I'm giving you another job, but as the Attorney General has said, we have got to find these partnerships are here. There are community groups that are out here every day who are seeing these things, boots on the ground, who are seeing these children, seeing these as young adults, seeing people who integrated back into society, who are having issues with jobs, with drugs, with all types of different things. And they have their programs for everything, the churches, their organizations. And so we've got to partner with those guys because they have their finger on the pulse. They know what's going on. And unless we do that, we're just setting ourselves up to continue to be reactionary. We will do our jobs, we'll do them well, but we have to find other ways to, I was told the best way to avoid a punch is not to be there. So if you see the punch is coming, then if we can start looking at ways to strategize not to be there when the punch gets there, that puts us in a better place.
Everything you said. I'm going to save my thought for the next question because I don't want to take away.
Sure, no, I've got a great next question.
Yes.
So, a lot of citizens are complaining about their belief that the rise in violent crimes are twofold. One, repeat offenders or low bonding amounts. How do you feel like by raising or having more strict measures for bond amounts, repeat offenders could impact or make your job better?
Well, there's two things you got to look at when you're talking about reforming that type of thing. And that would be under the rubric of criminal justice reform and judicial reform. You have institutions, you have systems, criminal justice system, the institutions of government that create a framework by which we move people through the bowels of government, right? The criminal justice system and the Department of Corrections and all that goes with it. And then you have the people who actually are in the institutions, the quality of people and the type, whether it's the quality of police officers policing in communities, whether it's the quality of judges adjudicating cases in the criminal justice system, the quality of defenders and prosecutors, and then you have the systems themselves. And so we can talk about bond reform all day long, but unless you have the type of judges who are held accountable for the type of bonds they place, then it doesn't matter how good the system is if you're putting the type. And by the way, that's not to besmirch the integrity or the quality of judges we have, but I believe that every component. I believe that when you look at government, I kind of grade government on a 5-way test. There are 5 attributes of good government. Good government is government that is responsible, predictable, accountable, profitable, stable. I'll repeat that again because it's worth repeating. Government that is responsible, predictable, accountable, profitable, and stable. The first 3 of those, responsible government, predictable government, accountable government, those are really the primary attributes of good government, and profitable government and stable government are byproducts when you apply the first 3. So how do you, if a judge, let's apply my rubric, my 5-way test on good government to criminal justice and more specifically judicial reform. And again, I'm not targeting any particular judge. I'm talking about the systems, not the people. Remember, there's systems and there are people who fill the systems. You can have good systems with bad people. You can have bad people in good systems, vice versa. I'm talking about the system. Right now, the way that we elect judges, if you don't like judges because they're letting repeat offenders out on like really low bonds and they're committing horrible, heinous acts, right? And you want to hold that judge accountable, how do you do it? How many people here know how we elect judges in South Carolina? There are 2 states that do it the way we do it, us and Virginia. Now, there are worse ways to do it, but the way that we do it, and I'll just give you a general overview. The way we elect judges are, you have, let's say you have an opening in circuit court in a particular county. There's this entity called the Judicial Merit Selection Commission. It's a 10-member commission where 5 of the members are appointed by the Speaker of the House, 3 of the members are appointed by the Judiciary Chairman of the Senate, and 2 members are appointed by the President Pro Tem of the Senate. So 3 legislative leaders appoint all 10 members of the JMSC. 6 of the 10 members are actually sitting members of the JMSC. Okay, when an opening occurs, 20 people will apply to be a judge. The JMSC, which is basically a legislatively dominated controlled organization, vets all those applications, spits out 3 people that they think are qualified that go before a vote to the General Assembly. Then the General Assembly votes on their favorite of the 3. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that those 3 people aren't qualified, but there were a lot of people who got excluded from that. And then the General Assembly votes on the General Assembly's own vetting process. And then if you go back to 3rd grade, why do we have 3 branches of government? Checks and balances, right? That's a component of accountability. What's the 3rd prong of good government? You know, a government that's responsible, predictable, and accountable. So that is a prong that I feel like it's the way by which we select our judges is not as accountable as it could be. Now, I'm not for popular election of judges either, but I do think the executive branch of government should have a role with the advice and consent of the General Assembly. That way, if you don't think the bench is diverse enough, you don't think the bench is quality enough, you don't think the bench is doing enough to protect communities, you can point to one person. The only people you can control directly are your House member and your senator. Okay, so if there's a bad judge doing bad things, your House member and senator say, hey, I voted against them, but you got to go to the other 168 people in the General Assembly. There's no way to hold them accountable. You can say the same thing about education system. There's power is spread out and so diffused and so dispersed when it comes to selecting of judges or how we do education policy that no one person can really own the problem and be held accountable for it. And I think, again, sometimes it's good to disperse power because you don't want to consolidate it in one person or one group. But other times, when you spread it out, you're going to get a hodgepodge of pockets of lack of quality in that particular system. That is one example of where I think how we select judges fails the accountability part of my 5-way test. That is one example I think we need to address reform. Criminal justice reform is another area that we can talk about in a minute, but that's how I think we holistically look at it.
Yeah, I think the bond issues, I was about to ask you a question. But,
sure, it was the criticism from constituents over bond, low bond limits for repeat offenders.
Sure. You got the first thing you got to understand is when a judge comes into play. So all of the things that Attorney General mentioned, that talks about essentially how the judges are appointed. But once they're appointed, once they're in place, once they're elected, and a bond matter comes before them, a defendant comes in and they're charged with whatever the matter is. The judge can really only look at 2 things: whether they're a flight risk or if they're a danger to the community. Those are the 2 things. And constitutionally, anybody who comes into court is entitled to a PR bond, meaning a personal recognizance bond, unless you can show that they're a flight risk or a danger to the community. And so there's this balancing test that has to be performed by the judge. And so oftentimes, I mean, what we hear so much, the buzzwords now are catch and release and catch and release. And I think there's a little bit of a misnomer to that. There's a small percentage of people who get in trouble, get out, and get back in trouble. And unfortunately, what you hear about is when that happens, sometimes they're more heinous type situations. But I don't think that's the proper narrative. There are some where that happens too, but there are many where that doesn't happen. And most of which I would submit to you that doesn't happen. But those are the metrics that are used, whether you're a danger to the community or a flight risk. And so when Alan, I don't know if you can use it, when Alan comes in and says, there needs to be an accountability piece. I mean, you should be able to look and say, all right, well, this particular judge has done this, this, and this over time. And there should be you should know, just like with elected officials, you can look at our record. You should be able to do the same with judges. And we should all be looked at for, how we're handling the matters that are brought in front of us. And we should be able to make decisions partially based on those matters.
I want to add one thing to what he said. I was talking about the quality of people filling the positions in the system. He was talking about the system. The system is, or the institution is, the body of laws or regulations or rules that the people follow, the infrastructure, right? So like you said, the two prongs that judges have to consider. The quality of judge then applies the system and how they apply the system. So he explained the system. He explained us how the system works. I explained how the quality of people get into the system. And you got to kind of look at reforming both sides of it to make sure that, and he is right. Everyone has a constitutional right with those exceptions. And there are, unless they're a violent criminal committed murder or something to a bond, but making sure that the judges aren't doing that balancing test so that they're always erring on the side of letting dangerous people in society, but while at the same time ensure their due process rights are adhered to.
Great. Thank you. We're going to do a quick break and ask some brave members of the audience who would like to, we're going to save some time. Yes, ma'am. Go right ahead.
Mr. Gibson, you spoke earlier about a meeting that you all had with a bunch of different groups together. Were there any representatives of the education system, superintendents or school board members? Was there anyone else of that represented there?
So last night's meeting, there were not. This was more of I don't necessarily like to use the word targeted, but this was the group last night was Project Ceasefire. And the way that works is there are people who have who are on probation or who may be on parole for some matter that they've already committed. And just looking at data and looking at metrics, they are in a group that is likely to reoffend as you look at several factors that we put together. And so we try to bring that group of people. It was about 33 people last night. We do this a couple times a year just to say, hey, these are services that are out here for you, whether it's education, whether it's housing, whether it's mental health, whether it's just an abundance of different resources that are out there. But we're saying statistically, and there's some education resources there. So I guess I just double spoke. Yes, there were some there. But just saying, hey, this is just a tap on the shoulder, letting you know that you are in a situation where statistically, people who fall in your category are ending up back in jail for much more serious situations, and sometimes even dead. And so just coming in and saying, hey, here's some options. Here's a clean glass of water. Here's another glass of water. Try to pick this one so that you don't have to see us in court again, but just trying to give options. So that's more or less what last night was about with those different providers. But on a weekly basis, I sit down with community members, some of which are educators, some of which are churches. And yes, we talk about these things in ways that we can try to connect resources. And again, I just keep coming back to the fact, resources are key. There are providers, there are people who I see out here in the audience right now who are out there boots on the ground daily, just trying to find ways to curb some of the violence. And they know the pockets, they know where the violence is, they know the signs, but can't find the funding. We've convened, I convened a group back in February where we sat down with county funding, we sat down with the Department of Justice, just to try to say, hey, these are grant opportunities. There are grant writers who are here who can help you. So there's funding that's out there, but again, we just have to find creative ways of putting people in rooms with people who can be accountable for how they spend the money, but just putting programs out there. There are programs here, there are programs already, but they just don't have the outreach because they don't have the funding. It's a long answer to the question.
Thank you.
Sure.
We'll come back at the end to ask some more questions. We're gonna try to stay on the script. And, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit in the script because we've got some more questions on that from the audience. But as I mentioned, starting out this program, this is our business community, business focus. So how have you seen violent crime impact economic development? Importantly, how would y'all recommend to this group and the business community of how they can get involved and improve things and help y'all and be your advocates moving forward?
Sure. I think I brought it. I hit a bunch of stuff. I tried to bring them in, left it in the car, but I'll tell you, there's a consortium of churches that has been getting together, and I know the week of June 20th through the 23rd, I believe, they're having kind of a gun buyback. That's where they're asking, and the Sheriff's Department is collaborating. I believe the City of Columbia is collaborating just getting illegal guns off the streets, no questions asked. And what they're doing is giving gift cards, I think $25 for pistols and $50 for assault rifles, gift cards, getting them off the street. You know, just finding ways to get these guns that should have been there in the first place off the street. I'm just trying to think, I got probably several there's a church in, I think it's a Word of God, and you may have seen or read about it in the newspaper, that just has opened a 50,000 square foot general event center where they have tournaments and things of that nature. I moved here in 10th grade, and then he moved to Columbia in 10th grade, and I came from, at that point, although I've got plenty of family in South Carolina, I came from Houston, Texas. And one of the things that they were proud of there is there were always community programs. There are always programs that were attached to the different universities. So University of Houston had programs, Rice University had programs, Texas Southern University had programs. And so every summer you had these summer enrichment camps. And so part of the camp was, you know, working on science and math. There's another part that worked on creative writing. There were parts that had sports, you know, concepts to it, but there was busing back and forth for those who didn't have the ability to get back and forth. But there were things that would keep people busy from 7:30 in the morning to about 6 o'clock at night. And that's something that I think that we're lacking a little bit in Columbia. We got to have a more collaborative effort there. I think those are things that when we first moved here, I know there were some programs that did some things like that. There were summer basketball leagues, summer track leagues, obviously there was Legion ball, things of that nature, but just things that keep people busy. Those saying, I don't mind, it's a devil's workshop. And so we got to understand that there has to be a little bit more investment in that side of things. You keep hearing me say that again, because I mean, I know what we do. We do it well. We can always do better. There's always room for improvement. But if we can do some other things well, with all the collective energy, all the collective mind, all the collective resources in here, and there's so many more of you, there are ways that we can start attacking this problem before it becomes a problem. But at the root, you know, we can till the soil and plant fresher. You can do more with fruit if you till the soil and do more when you're grooming it coming up than when it starts coming off the tree. And I'm just a believer, if we can take 4 or 5 steps back and start working in those areas, you'll see the benefits of it going forward.
Does the question basically what can they do as business owners or as a trade association, as a chamber?
Just, I guess this being, you know, us all being concerned about violent crimes or general crimes impacting economic development. How, as members of the chamber, can we advocate for help that are, you know, outside of government funding to, you know, programs like you gave an example earlier about that is, you know.
Let me lead off with that example to segue into my answer to your question. Years ago, I sponsored a program in the state. We did it for a couple of years called Badges for Baseball. It was started by Cal Ripken Jr.'s father. Cal Ripken Jr. presented it to us at an AG conference, and we brought it here, and we kind of morphed it into, because it's hard to sustain a baseball program. You got all the equipment, the gloves, bats, everything. So we turned it into an after-school dodgeball league. And the City of Columbia, Richland County Sheriff's Department came together, and I actually had law enforcement officers give me anecdote stories. But what it is, you take kids, they don't necessarily have to be at-risk kids or inner city youth, but just kids in an after-school situation where they can marry up in a league with police officers. And here's an anecdotal story to illustrate what it can do. I had an officer, it wasn't from this jurisdiction, but one not far from here, who said, okay, I'm a middle-aged white guy, is what he said. I have this team of kids. One of the kids is a 12-year-old black kid. He and I seemingly have nothing in common. In fact, I was part of a drug operation that busted his brother. His older brother, who's now like 20, is sitting in prison for a drug trafficking ring that our agency broke up. And I was part of that. This young kid should look at me with contempt because I was part of the system that put his brother in prison, or in his mind. And he says, this kid and I started working together after school 2 or 3 days a week for several months. By the end of that whole time, this kid was calling me coach. This kid was calling me, asking me, I was helping him with this math homework after practice. This kid was asking me for advice on this girl he liked. It was like I became like a mentor to this kid as opposed to something else. It had this program not. So that is an anecdotal story. There was another story that officers told us where they were out on the baseball field, and there were some gang members out on the, the outfield fence line. They pulled their cars up to just roll out on the outfield fence line. And there were some, gang members out there kind of sitting on the hoods of the cars, watching the cops and the kids practice their baseball skills. And the cops, they were out there in their baseball gear. Some of the cops said, you know what, we're going to go tell these kids. They were trying to intimidate the younger kids because they were trying to groom the younger kids to join the gang. So the cops put on their utility belts around their baseball pants and t-shirts. They started to walk out there to tell these young people, these other people who were in the gangs to leave, just go somewhere else. And they turned around and all the 10 and 12-year-olds that grabbed baseball bats were walking out to the cops. And they had to turn to their kids to say, hey, y'all, we got this. But the kids were teaming up with the cops. And the cops are there to protect the kids. And it was teaching, with the police officer telling me, one of the cops came to me and said, what I'm doing now is I police a community that doesn't look like me. What I'm doing is I'm going door to door right now and saying, hey, I'm Officer Jones. I'm going to be patrolling this area. I want to give you my card. I want to let you know who I am, what I'm doing. You might see my cruiser out here. If you've got some kids that want to go throw a ball or toss a frisbee, be out here in this park in the middle of your community. I'm going to be driving around. If you see me driving around and something bothers you, call me or wave me down. But I wanted you to know, I'm here to help protect your community. What can I do for you? And establish, active policing with the community. That's what Badges for Baseball or the offshoot programs that we did are designed to do. And I tell you those anecdotal stories to inspire you to say that it is hard for a law enforcement agency or a prosecutive agency like mine to sustain this. It would be great if trade associations or education associations or community groups, Rotary clubs, whatever, Sertoma, you pick it, Chamber, sponsor one of these groups. We'll partner with you. And they're cheap. I mean, it's the cost of time and maybe buying the kids some t-shirts so that they can have some teams and do a dodgeball league. A 12-year-old kid throwing a ball at a cop is fun and in a good way, right? And the cop throwing the ball back and then teaching the kids about, integrity and honesty and work ethics and stuff. And the cop learn from the kids too. It's a two-way street. That is one way that the communities can help us by creating incubators to develop relationships between the law enforcement community and the community state police. Another way you can help is you'll see a lot of debates in the General Assembly, criminal justice reform. I have some issues with what's being debated right now in the General Assembly because I feel like they start from an assumption and then the entire reform is based on an assumption that it isn't entirely accurate. And the end result will be a bad law with good intentions, but will have bad consequences. And I can unpack that in a future question, but sitting down, understanding law enforcement and prosecution's understanding of what they're trying to do in the general when it comes to criminal justice reform or any reform, and then advocating once you understand our position, and if you agree with our position, because our position is we want the safest communities possible. And the safer the community is, the more economic development you're going to have it. People want to move into it, they want to develop it, they want to grow it, they want to participate in it. If you support the positions, again, if you disagree, don't do it. But if you agree with us after learning about the law, then contact through your association or through your own business, through your own way, contact legislators and say, hey, I understand y'all are trying to pass this law, and I think it could be harmful to prosecution or the law enforcement community, and I think it could be harmful to our ability to grow our communities. They listen to you. They listen to business owners. They listen to citizens in their respective districts. But those are my thoughts.
Basically saying they listen to voters. and so that's crucial. I mean,
listen to a lot of voters.
They do it. If you can, you got to educate yourself on the issues, and we can be advocates for that. We can help you with those things. But once you're able to do that, then be able to advocate and to say, hey, why don't you come talk to us about what you're trying to do, and have an open mic where you can debate and talk back and forth about what the ramifications of the policies are they're trying to pass. That matters, because there needs to be more back and forth. There's a point where you get preached at so much, and you get so many things that are just thrown at you, but you're rarely part of that conversation that helps inform it. When you can become part of that conversation, I think that's really true. That's the sweet spot.
When you ask the open-ended question, what can y'all do? My mind is just racing. You're thinking of stuff too. So I sit as chair of the statewide human trafficking task force. I also am chairman of the state ICAC Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. You all, as a trade association or as individual citizens or as business owners, can join, for instance, our human trafficking task force. We started off as 15 mandated members in our state law. We now have over 700 members in our state task force. That state task force is an umbrella over 9 regional task force that are more localized in the state of South Carolina. Human trafficking is a real problem. Gangs, we always associate gang activity. It doesn't have to be a gang, but you associate gang activity with drug and property crimes and other violent crimes that feed those types of crimes. Human trafficking is a subcomponent of that, and it drives it because it's easier to sell a person than it is to sell a drug, because you have to go back and get a new drug, you can reuse a person. And so the task force is wanting to give buy-in from community members. This chamber can join the state human trafficking task force. You can join the local task force. Our solicitors, our local law enforcement are members of this. We will come to one of these events with my team, and we will give you a presentation on the state of South Carolina and our work we're doing to combat human trafficking and what roles, how you can identify it, what you do when you see it, how to report it, how to fight against it, how to create a community that doesn't tolerate it. We can teach you the technical aspects of it. Same with internet crimes against children. We travel to schools, talking to kids about, trying to protect little kids from predators, but I'm also trying to protect them from each other, right? Cyberbullying, sexting, all these things that kids do, they still have lizard brains, right? But we give them these things when they're 12 years old, and imagine what you would do with this as a 12-year-old back in, when you were 12. And thank God they didn't have these when I was 12. I was a nut. But the point is protecting kids from predators and themselves and educating them. We'd be happy to come and educate you as parents and as local citizens on how to better educate kids and yourself on how to protect yourself from online fraud, but also online predatory behavior, as well as how to engage in human trafficking efforts in your respective communities. And that is another way that y'all can be helping to us.
By the way, y'all don't get to see this, but I have this cheat sheet that I go through each week. And these are probably the most prepared speakers we've already had, because they've covered sections 8, 9, and 10, and 11. They obviously took to heart what they were doing to come in here today and preparing. I've got one more question that if y'all have time to open up for a couple from the group. And this is just recent, but there's a proposed law by Senator Harpootlian trying to increase mandatory sentences for illegal gun possession. Carl and I were talking about supporting. I think initially they were trying to first offense, now they're trying to get a second offense to get some more support. I think the governor's initially echoed some support. So I know that y'all don't understand every detail and text of the bill, but generally speaking, the idea of sentences for like second offense on guns, how do you feel about that?
I think it's about time. And I'll say this as a caveat. I'm a believer in the Second Amendment. Do I own firearms? That being said, there's a responsible gun ownership piece of this that we rarely talk about, and until bad things happen. And I've mentioned this for years. I've never understood, even when I was a criminal defense lawyer, why there wasn't a graduated gun offense situation. And when I say graduated, I mean this. If a person goes out today and gets arrested for driving under the influence, gets convicted, that's DUI first. They get arrested, convicted a second time. Well, they get arrested a second time, it's DUI second. So forth and so on. Third, fourth, fifth, so forth and so on. Driving under suspension, graduated offenses. First time DUS, second time DUS second, third time DUS third. Shoplifting, first, second, third, so forth and so on. Drug offenses, same thing. That does not exist for unlawful carrying of a pistol. So what Senator Harpootlian has proposed, and I appreciate that somebody's had the courage to actually pin this and to get the debate started, is that if you are arrested for unlawfully carrying a pistol, meaning you don't have a concealed weapons permit and that pistol is somewhere where it should be in your car, it's not stowed away properly, it's not in the glove compartment, in the lock compartment, something like that. It's on the seat or underneath the seat, which people do from time to time, you can be charged with unlawful carrying of a pistol. Initially, Senator Harpootlian proposed essentially mandatory minimums from the minute a person is charged. So that for that first offense, a mandatory minimum of 1 year. I'm not for that, because people make mistakes. There can be times somebody could get in the car and place the gun somewhere where it shouldn't be, and they could be charged for it. I understand that. So fine. My belief is sure there should not be a mandatory minimum on a first offense, but if you start talking going forward, second, thirds, by the first time, you should learn after the first situation. If you're not supposed to have a gun, you should have it. And that's just point blank. And I understand, there are arguments for why people have them, and that's an issue. We need to have more strict gun laws for people who are carrying and possessing weapons. We also need to have some type of mandatory reporting if you have a firearm that's stolen. What I've seen in my 3 years as solicitor is so many guns get stolen from people's cars just by shaking door handles because the car is unlocked. or it was left in the car overnight and you didn't really think about it. If you're gonna own a gun, you gotta be responsible about it. Don't leave it in the car. Or if it gets stolen, you need to report it so that it can be tracked properly. And so I think there are lots of little bits and pieces here. There's so many things we can unpack and get into the weeds of it, but the first answer is yes. I support, we've got to have a little bit stricter gun laws because you got to have some teeth. And if there's some teeth, then maybe a person will think a second time before carrying a gun in a place where they shouldn't be carrying one without the proper license to carry.
Thank you. Same question.
And thank you for going first, because I have not yet read Senator Hartley's mandatory minimum for second offense, unlawful carrying of a gun. I want to go back a little bit and say how you do something is as important as what you do. I'm going to back into the question because a couple of years ago, we sued the city of Columbia on gun ordinances as it relates to this. The city of Columbia was, and their intent was to try to address gun crimes in the city. And they passed a number of, they were called red flag laws. What I tell people is first, how you do something has got to be done. And I had bipartisan support in General Assembly on this, but the General Assembly passed a law that said the buying, transportation, possession, manufacturing of firearms all has to be legislated by the General Assembly. And the reason is because you don't want to have a patchwork of how many 100 plus municipalities and 46 counties all passing different ordinances. And so like I drive from out in Lexington all the way to downtown Columbia to work every day. I passed 3 different jurisdictions, including the unincorporated areas of Lexington, Richland, City of Lexington, West Columbia, City of Columbia, probably 5 or 6 different jurisdictions. And if you're driving and you're having to, the ordinances on cities are changing from, you all drive to multiple jurisdictions a day. And so they did that because they wanted uniform gun laws in South Carolina. So my issue was you're violating the state law and you're preempted. And the court upheld our position. And of course, City of Columbia has since backed off the gun ordinances. You have legislators that represent this community in the General Assembly. So the right way to do it is if you want to pass a sensible gun regulation, then that has to be done through the people's elected representatives at the state house because it would apply uniformly across all jurisdictions. That was my main beat. And so that's why I did what I did. So the proper way to debate and pass a gun law is at the state General Assembly, not at the local municipal level. I wanted to qualify that first because I know that I was in the local papers here about that. That was the issue, making it consistent and uniform. So Senator Hartley is going about the debate the right way as it relates to whether it's good or bad law. Generally speaking, I think you give prosecutors a tool, and I have not read the bill other than what Solicitor just described it as. Earlier in my discussion, we talked about the quality of people in the systems and the quality of the systems that they're in. Okay, so the quality of the prosecutors, public defenders, judges, et cetera, as well as the quality of the system. So I've always said mandatory minimums are a tool that prosecutors can use to, if someone is a habitual offender or has a set of underlying facts that are really bad, that from an evidentiary standpoint is problematic to get it in the trial. Sometimes the prosecutor can use charge someone with a mandatory minimum, knowing that they will plead to a lesser included offense. You have this misnomer that there are a lot of people sitting in jail for possession of drug cases, right? And that's why we're punishing people for possessing a drug or using a drug. That is never the case. Usually it's that the prosecutor used that mandatory minimum. They were a drug trafficker or they were habitual, a drug seller, a commercial seller, and they had possession with intent to distribute or trafficking. But because of whatever was going on with the case, they were allowed to plead that person down to a possession offense. They used the fact that it was a mandatory minimum to get that person to plead to something to hold them accountable, whereas they might not have been able to do it because of some type of flaw in the evidentiary process. So mandatory minimums can be used as a tool by good prosecutors and good law enforcement officers in the criminal justice system to hold people accountable. Because if you don't have a mandatory minimum, you don't have a stick that offering them a penalty with a non-mandatory minimum is a carrot. We're holding you accountable. We're putting a lick on you. We're putting a little mark on you. Okay, you violated the law. Whether that can be applied to the drug, from the drug concept to the gun concept, I'd like to study the law a little bit, but that is my general thinking mandatory minimums. They are a good tool to hold people accountable when they would never plead otherwise, because they're not going to plead to something with it's an open-ended case. But if there's a mandatory minimum hangover, it makes them think twice, about not pleading. So that is a potential tool. We do it with the new, when we reform the domestic abuse statutes, the criminal domestic violence statutes. Criminal domestic violence used to be based on a number of offenses. Now they're based on the type of harm caused when you do it. Because, the first time someone offends a domestic abuse case, it's not the first time they beat their spouse, it's the first time they got caught. And so if you beat your spouse severely, you can go straight to a higher mandatory minimum on the very first charge because of the severity of the beating. And if you feel like you have an evidentiary issue, you can plead them down and hold them accountable with the domestic. Now you have a domestic charge on them. That could be applied over on the gun area. At the same time, the last thing I want to be supportive of is someone who ended a nonviolent business owner who ended as the solicitor mentioned, and I think he would agree. We don't want any type of gun laws passed that could be used as a weapon, but as a club against people for an inadvertent violation or infraction of the law. Obviously, you should be held accountable for it, and I agree with what he said. You got to be responsible gun owners, and you got to report when it's stolen, and you got to keep your guns put up. We don't want kids getting a hold of. We don't want someone busting your glass, stealing your gun, and using to rob a liquor store 2 weeks later. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we're not violating people's Second Amendment rights, and I agree with him. I'm a pro-Second Amendment person. There's a balance there. That's a long answer for a very short question, but I wanted to give you some context to how I approach it. So, I haven't read the bill. I'd like to read the bill. I can see the point in the bill, but I'd like to understand a little bit more before I weigh in on it. It could be a good bill.
Thank you. Would y'all be, I know we ran a little bit over and started a little late. Could y'all be available for about 5 to 10 more minutes for questions? Sure. Yes, ma'am. I'm right here up front.
Okay. So let's address the white elephant in the room, which is the number of mass gun shootings. In South Carolina went from 7 in 2017 to 17 in 2021. So far this year, 7 mass shootings in South Carolina have left 7 dead and 37 injured. Gun violence has led to 10 deaths, 18 injuries among teens this year statewide, and 5 children, 11 and younger, have been injured. Which I feel is, and as most citizens in South Carolina feel, is tied to a bill allowing people to open carry handguns. Despite opposition from medical professionals, business, and faith leaders, law enforcement, and the vast majority of South Carolinians. So where are we now as the nation focuses on South Carolina as to what has happened? I know as a citizen and a voter, I'm not going nowhere to Columbiana Mall to shop. And I'm sure that's the vast majority. I'm sure a lot of tourists and incoming folks reconsider coming to our state and relocating or opening a business. And so I would like to address that white elephant in the room, whereas we are a open carry gun toting new Western state. And now in 2022. And so what's being addressed with the open carry situation, guns, etc., exploding all around us, and the increase in mass shootings.
So if I can summarize, you're asking them if they see a correlation based on the change in law with that exact data.
That's correct.
Okay. Everyone would like to go first.
There's a lot in that question, and I think we've got to start with understanding what our roles are. If you're asking about correlations, is there a correlation with more gun violence? Absolutely, we see that correlation. If you're asking what can, in our role or in my role specifically, what can I do as a result of that correlation? I can repeat what I've said before. Life without the possibility of parole, with all the different convictions we've had for murders this year, every murder trial we've had this year, we've had a conviction, we've had six convictions. So when it gets to our office, we can prosecute vigorously, which we will do. We can educate, we can come and have discussions, but some of what you're talking about when it comes to open carry, those types of conversations, that requires other people to be in the room, meaning legislators. And when things get passed through legislation, the best way to combat that is to have legislators who do not agree with that, with whatever these bills, with the open carry, those parts. I mean, if you have legislators who you can get in the room, who you can talk to, and you can influence the way those things are passed, then that will help. We can only prosecute based on the laws that are already passed, the laws that are on the books. And so our job is to go and vigorously work, vigorously, do the best that we can in these situations. But if you want to change the laws, we got to get some legislators in the room. You got to get like-minded people in the room who are willing to listen to, what your position is and listen to this data and to do more based on that data.
And ma'am, I haven't read the report you cited in your study or in the study that you were mentioning. There's a difference between causation and correlation. I'm not here to debate which is in effect here. What I would say is, let's have an academic conversation for a minute. Are there more violent crimes being caused with guns because people are being allowed to open carry? That's the first question. It's an open-ended question. The next question would be, do people who commit violent crimes care if there's a law that allows them to open carry? Are they going to carry anyway? When you look at you look at the timing of when the open carry law was passed, and it seems like I'm defending the open carry law, but I want to think critically about this for a minute. The open carry law was passed during the pandemic period of time, right? There was a lot of lockdowns going on. There was a spike in crime. 2020 saw a 22% increase in murders, 10% increase in aggravated assault cases in South Carolina, slightly below the national average, 8 points below the national average. But that was during a time when there was an uptick in, civil unrest. There was an uptick in crimes because, kids were being kept at home and there was less adult supervision and there was more gang activity being fed. You got the fentanyl, the opioid crisis feeding the state of South Carolina, which feeds the local property crimes and violent crimes that feed that type of activity. So the question is the fact that open carry was passed, is it causing the violent crime or is it just correlated with it? We only put windmills where the wind blows. Does the windmills cause the wind to blow, or do they spin because, is it a causation or is it a correlation? And that's the point I'm making. So to your question is that I don't know, I haven't read the study, and I don't know that I have an answer that refutes it or supports a different position other than to say is that, does allowing law-abiding citizens to carry a gun cause citizens who don't abide by the law to commit more crime? And that to me seems more of a correlation issue than a causation issue. So I don't know. I'll stay with what Solicitor Gibson said. Our job is to enforce the laws that they pass. I think you give us a stick to punish those who violate the law, and that's what we can do. I mean, that's really all I can do as the executive branch of government. They pass the laws, we enforce.
Thank you. One last question. Yes, sir, gentleman here.
Yeah, I want to, my name is Mr. Mustafa. I work in many communities here locally, one particularly about the Bishop, me and my brother James Sanders. One of the, used to be, and probably still is, one of the worst communities. My observation, our observation, one, guns and drugs in our community need to be replaced, and I heard it, with resources. And we need to get a handle on these guns and drugs. We should know who's bringing in these guns and drugs. That's the first thing we need to do, get a handle on that. We suggest, from the community perspective, that we need a PPP, public-private partnership, with everyone at the table, from local government, from the individuals from the communities, state rep, senator, including congressmen, so we can come together and get this solution. The key to me, I always tell folks, is education. Okay, when you look at these teenagers from here all the way up and become adults, we're graduating our children who can't even read and write. They're not even career ready. So what do you suspect? You put one loaf of bread in the community, you put guns and drugs in the community, and you suspect some results. You're not gonna get no results. We have to talk reality, especially when it comes down to these Black communities, because it's the same thing again and again and again. Until we talk reality about what's going on, then nothing's gonna change. We have to be proactive. And by being proactive, create a PPP and bring everybody at the table and get the monies and the resources. Me and Brother James had a nonprofit organization in the community, in the heart of the community, and it was successful. We tried to get partnership with the school district. You think they wanted to partner with us? No. Not only that, they kicked us out of the community when we advocated because of the fact that they had about 15 apartments that was backed up. And we went in front of the city council to say, hey, they kicking the apartments is backed up with sewer. They cannot find any place for these people and they want to kick them out. We went in front of the city council, advocated for the folks. We went back for our class. Guess what they did? They kicked us out. So again, we have to be serious about this thing. If not, it's the same old thing. But guns and drugs, we can put a hand on that. We need to get SLED involved, the local police is involved, and stop these drugs and guns from coming in our community. That's the key. But we have to come together as a unit through the PPP. There's best models out here. We have the best models. It is crime against children when they graduate and cannot read and write, when they're not on grade level. That's a crime in itself.
Thank you for your comments, and I'll actually use that as a good transitioning finishing up. Today is actually Let's Give Day, and so I think both of our speakers today have talked about giving back to the community. You just made a good point about giving back to the community. So we encourage everyone today to focus on their nonprofits that are serving the communities and taking these efforts up to take time to give it to them today. I'd like to thank both speakers for coming today and allow y'all 1 minute to summary, finish up your statements, and we'll adjourn from there. Go ahead.
Sure. I'll just jump in and say again, I appreciate the invitation. Anytime we're asked, we'd be more than happy to be here. Just to echo what Mr. Mustafa just said, I think, and I'm not sure kind of how the chamber is structured, but to have an outreach committee that is there, where communities can come in and kind of talk about the part of the things that they're doing, and then possibly find collaboration amongst the chamber. I think that could be very beneficial. I think that just the opportunity for us to educate and just others, I'm sure you have legislators and all come in, but just to have conversations, open ear conversations, and then look for solutions. Because to me, it's always good. I figure this is almost like a revival where you come in and everybody talks about what the issues are and everyone gets the spirit and we all go out happy. But then what are the next steps? When you go home, what are the next steps? So to put some next steps into place so that we can start actually seeing, some baby steps going towards some type of goal. The fact that you're here matters. It means that you care. But if we really want to do something that's going to help us kind of curb the gun violence, of course, as I said before, we're going to do our jobs. We're going to do that. But to reach out and to have more partnerships and more collaboration, I think is key. And if we do that, I think we can start seeing an appreciable difference in some of the issues that you're having here.
Mr. Mustafa, I agree with what you said. I'm a big fan of public-private partnerships, which is what we talk about the badges for baseball. And that's just one example. There's a lot of other different focal groups that we could partner with. I would love to partner with the chamber here. Listen, the Office of Attorney General belongs to all of you. I'm just a trustee of it. If you want us to partner with you on some, but I can't own all the programs because that's not my primary function. That's not his primary function, but we're happy to support you in your programs. So that's one thing. You also talked about the education system. I think we were saying the same thing, just using different words. One is we're reacting to the gun and drug problem. The other is what's causing it and attacking the cause, which is poor education system. That's right. And the infrastructure in the communities, the jobs, and there's hopelessness. People do hopeless things, right? When they become addicted to something, or when you pass a kid to the education system with no education, they can't read, then you've taken away their options.
That's right. That's right.
And when they take away their options, the only options they have are usually not the kind of options we as a community, as a society want them to have, and that feeds crime in our communities. So that is addressing the cause. We can prosecute and lock people up all day long, but that is not fixing the cause of the problem to begin with. That is why I said an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. We're the pound of cure. We're not even a pound. We're half a pound. But and again, this will take away from what I said earlier in the discussion that I don't think we should take some of the money from law enforcement and give it to prevention. I don't think we should stop funding law enforcement and prosecution, including, by the way, indigent defense. Okay, they're part of the criminal justice system too. All right, I'm supportive of what they're doing as well because they have to move into the system. But we also have to. We just can't turn our backs on education and jobs and single parent families or families that are broken in the communities. We got that is the molecular level of the problem right there. That's right. And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's in every community. That pathology exists in every community. We need to attack it head on. Thank you so much for having me here. Again, I appreciate this engagement with all of you. I'm learning a lot about, how I can be better at my job. I'm sure Solicitor Gibson's learning how he can do his job better, but we couldn't do our jobs if it wasn't for you being here. So thank you for engaging us so much.
Thank you both. We really appreciate it.